Greetings, fellow Whovians, and welcome back to Unrepentant Geeking, the show where a geek can be a geek. And yes, unfortunately, my voice is still very far from 100%. It was a fun week at work, considering I have to use my voice at my job a lot. Thankfully, I can also do a lot through email. But anyways, I shouldn't be wasting my voice on inanity like that. Let's just get right down to the review, shall we? Because boy, do I have a lot to say about the Demons of Punjab, the latest episode of Doctor Who. Whether or not I've got enough of a voice to say it all, we'll see, but I've definitely got things to say. So, once again, another late episode of the show. That's because I was really hoping my voice would recover sooner than it has, but it hasn't, so I beg your indulgence. I'm having trouble talking still. Sorry. Anyways, let's get to the episode. This is, of course, the 6th episode of the 11th season of modern Doctor Who, Demons of the Punjab. It is the first episode not written by current series head, whatever you want to call him, Chris Chibnall. Of course, he was almost certainly involved in the writing of the episode in some degree, but he does not have a writing credit on it. And that is the first episode of the season in which we can say that. The episode was written by Vinay Patel, a relative newcomer. I mean, he started probably first back around 2008, but he's mostly done work in theater and television. He's had a couple of small credits on smaller films. But based on this episode, I think this guy's got a real future because, wow. Demons of the Punjab was remarkable. And especially remarkable coming in the same season that already gave us an episode like Rosa. So, this is the second historical episode of the season. And much like Rosa, this is a historical more in the classic sense. Now, like Rosa, there is an actual sci-fi element. In this case, aliens. There are aliens in this episode, but really, what this shares in common with Rosa is an attempt to explore a relatively recent, especially by Who standards, historical event, using it as the backdrop for the story, and trying to tell something that isn't really a fun, light adventure. In some ways, this is even darker than Rosa. Rosa was a remarkable episode because of how boldly and unapologetically it explored racism and the cost of that. That was an episode where the characters, especially Ryan and Yaz, almost never felt safe anytime they were on screen, especially when they were out in public. It really captured the feel of what it was like, I think, to be somebody who wasn't part of the majority in a society that is heavily weighed against minorities, and presenting the dangers and the stress and the pain of living that kind of life. But at the end of the day, Rose is ultimately something of an uplifting episode. Yes, there are hard moments. That moment early on in Rosa, where Ryan gets slapped and threatened to be lynched, still resonates with me. It was such a shocking, painful, terrible moment. But still, that was telling the story of a specific person, a real person. It was really Rosa Parks' story, and the rest of our characters were along to varying degrees for the ride. And also, as the nature of that, it was ultimately a story with, I hesitate to call it a happy ending, but a positive ending. The episode went out of its way to make it clear that no, things weren't perfect for Rosa Parks, and obviously we live in a world where racism and the fight against racism and bigotry are very much alive and sadly well. This is a fight that continues, and is, if anything, we're being pushed back against, and the fight has gotten much more, explicit and much more drawn to the surface for a lot of people who would maybe foolishly convince themselves that maybe we were past the worst of it and that it was all heading towards that utopian Star Trek future I know I dream of and a lot of people do, but no, we have a long way to go. We probably will never actually reach that. But regardless, Rosa is something of an uplifting episode at the end of the day. Demons of the Punjab is a tragedy. It is just a flat-out tragedy. Period. It's a very good episode. It's not to say that the episode is just dour darkness. It's not grim dark. There is still hope in it. There is still lots of beauty. There is still a belief in the better nature of people. But it's balanced against what happens when the worst nature wins out. And there's no disguising that this is an episode that ends so sadly. And in that sadness, there is a beauty, but it's painful and terrible to watch. And yet the episode is also quick to point out that even out of such tragedy, wonderful things can grow, wonderful things can arise. But the pain and the cost of it is great, but still life goes on and good things can happen. And Yasmin Khan, played by Mandeep Gill, one of our TARDIS team, she's living proof of that. And going forward as a character, she's going to have to realize, it's clear she's internalizing that idea that her life literally only exists because of this incredible tragedy experienced by her grandmother. And that is such a powerful message. And the show expresses it so unabashedly, so straightforwardly, so honestly. It's amazing that in one season we've gotten episodes as good, as remarkable, as painful, as honest as Demons of the Punjab and Rosa. And look, I know there's some people who are not happy with these two episodes. I know there's some people out there who are complaining, where's the fun in our Doctor Who? Which I just kind of want to stare and point at, gape-jawed at, because this episode follows on this Tsununga conundrum, which was a friggin' episode set in a space ambulance in space, where the cutest little terrifying monster ever is the enemy. I mean, that we have a male pregnancy. I mean, and the episode before that, we had giant friggin' spiders. Battles with giant spiders again. In the backdrop of a hotel owned by a thinly veiled Donald Trump stand-in. I mean, there is still, the idea that Doctor Who is suddenly become a dour, endlessly, there's no fun in Doctor Who anymore. It's just so wrong-headed. And it's not true. It's demonstratively not true. I mean, episode 2 of this season, the main bad guys is living cloth. Terrifying living cloth. But I mean, come on, that's ridiculous in all the best ways. We had a friggin' Tooth Fairy as the bad guy in the first episode. There's still plenty of room for fun. But you know what? In a 10-episode season, 11 if you count the New Year special, there's also room for more. At the end of the day, Doctor Who is science fiction. And in my opinion, and it's not an opinion that's mine alone, I think it's an opinion shared by many people. This is not an original idea I'm about to state, but science fiction is meant to light the way. Science fiction is meant to be a beacon. Science fiction and just genre in general, science fiction, fantasy, all of it, are yes, they can be fun. Yes, they can be silly. And yes, they can be light. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. And there's plenty of room for that, especially in Doctor Who. But they also can be used as a way to tell stories that you couldn't otherwise tell. Or at least not tell as effectively, or tell in a way that as many people might be willing to digest and experience. And that it can confront issues and ideas that supposed mainstream dramas might be afraid to do or unable to do for a variety of reasons. And that's what science fiction could do. And yes, it often does it in the form of metaphor. Again, Doctor Who is very familiar with that, but sometimes we need to drop the metaphor and we need to boldly face certain ideas head on in a straightforward fashion, if only to try and do some sort of justice to all the misery and pain and loss of life that has been inflicted against so many over the years. And Demons of Punjab deals with a particularly tragic, awful example of that in relatively recent history. This episode is largely set in 1947. There are still people alive. That's part of the point. There are still plenty of people alive who were alive then, for which this incident was not just history, something you read in a book, that the partition of India was not some dry thing in a dry history book. It was something they lived through, and it was something they survived, is really the right word. And the partition of India, look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm an expert on it. I'm not a historian. I do enjoy, if that's the right word, historical books. I regularly probably consume something like 30 or 40 of them a year. I intersperse my diet of science fiction and fantasy and other fiction with nonfiction because I think it's interesting, fascinating, and I also think it's important because if you don't remember history, as the saying goes, you do to repeat it. But I'm not an expert on this, but I am at least vaguely familiar with it. I have heard of it before. I know something of it, which is probably more than a lot of people, especially in America, could say. And this is not a anti-America rant or anything like that. I suspect strongly in the same way that if you went to India, I wonder how many people would actually know about the American Civil War. They might have heard about it. If they have heard about it, they've probably heard about it through movies. And even then, I doubt they could name anything resembling specifics. The difference is there's plenty of stuff out there exploring the Civil War in fiction and nonfiction, the American Civil War. And there's plenty of resources out there. The partition of India, the same cannot be said, especially, again, on this side of the pond. And I'm glad to see Doctor Who tackling something which is very much, it's not an accident that Doctor Who has never really gone to this time and place before. It's not an accident. This is there's no two ways around it. This is a very shameful moment in British history. And Britain definitely plays a big part in this. They did. Again, there's much better things out there, much better resources. If you want, start on Wikipedia. It's a good starting point, and then follow the links from there. The Wikipedia article highlights plenty of great books and other resources that are, there are websites dedicated. There are books to it. It is definitely a terrible but, fascinating point in history, and definitely one worth exploring, if just to see what can happen when thoughtlessness is writ large upon an entire region, and the cost in millions that can come out as a result. That these aren't games, that people shouldn't be treated that way. But regardless, it's not an accident the show's never gone here before, but it's also not an accident it's coming here now. And I think they tackle it with great honesty. I think they tackle it with great delicacy. I think they tackle it with incredible effectiveness. This is a remarkable episode in a season that already gave us, as I've said several times, Rosa. And I'm sorry, but any show that can give us 2 episodes of that quality in one season is doing something right. Now, that's not to say this has been a perfect season. There's no such thing as a perfect season of Doctor Who. There are still issues with the series. The biggest issue remains Yaz, played by Mandip Gill. I said last week I hoped this episode would help correct some of the problems with Yaz as a character. And to a degree it does. The thing is this. The problem with Yaz at this point is I don't have any trouble now establishing who she was and where she came from. What I have a problem with is who she is now and where she's going. We've reached the point in the season, we're past the halfway point, where I have a pretty good handle on the characterization of this version of the Doctor, Graham, and Ryan. I have a generally decent idea how the 3 of them will react if you just throw them into any situation. If you held a gun to my head and said, okay, Shaun, you've got to write Doctor Who fan fiction. I'm going to give you random scenarios, and you've got to do your best to keep these characters in character. I feel like I could do a decent enough job of doing that, at least in a plot outline kind of way, for the Doctor, Graham, and Ryan. I feel like if you give me a scenario, I can largely game out how they're probably going to react. And that's not to say they're one-dimensional or they're simple characters. It's just they're very well established. Their characterization has become very strong. And you could definitely see what drives them. I get why Graham's in the TARDIS. He's normally, it's clear that he's somebody who's not normally prone to adventure, but that he had this traumatic experience and he thought it was going to kill him and he survived. And in the process, he met this amazing woman who he fell in love with. And this woman pushed him out of his comfort zone, and they clearly helped, they clearly balanced each other out. And then he loses her, and he loses her in a violent, shocking, painful way. And he's faced with the prospect of having to go back to that empty house filled with ghosts, metaphorical or otherwise, and forced to confront this pain, and it's clear that, he clearly was expecting to spend the rest of his life with her. And he ended up spending the rest of her life with her. And that prospect is clearly something he can't deal with, and so this is a retreat. This is an attempt at escape, and it's not healthy, and it's clearly something that's boiling under the surface, and I expect it to eventually come to a full boil, either by the end of this season or maybe by the next. It's definitely, I fully expect the trajectory for Graham is that, no, this isn't healthy, and he's going to have to confront this. And then you have Ryan. Ryan is a young man who's at a crossroads. Ryan, in some ways, he has a lot of similarities with Graham. They're both awkward in their own skin, but with Graham, it's more like it's more like he's just that way almost because he chooses to be. Where with Ryan, he's got outward forces that are pushing him in this way, and but he has inherited from his grandmother the adventurous spirit. He's somebody who wants to see more. He's struggling with his own past, and by going with the doctor, he's trying to bring that into focus and figure out where he wants to go and how he wants to deal with his past, and he makes a lot of sense as a character. Yaz, I don't feel as Yaz is described, in previous episodes as a workaholic, somebody who's totally in on being a police officer. So why is she in the TARDIS? No, seriously, I get it. The TARDIS is this amazing thing. Who wouldn't want the TARDIS to appear right in front of them and jump in and go off on the Doctor with adventures? Well, actually, a lot of people wouldn't. It's one thing to watch it. It's another thing to actually try and live it. And you have this character who has very strong roots to her family. Yes, her family drives her crazy, but not in a bad way. We see that it reinforced in this episode that the family overall has a pretty healthy relationship, it seems to say. What Yaz is experiencing is pretty standard growing pains. She's become an adult, but she's still in the shadows of her childhood, living with her family still, and not, still coming into her own professionally and personally, and all of that is very normal, and I don't know if I quite buy that's enough to push this character, who's apparently so dedicated to her job, away from it, because this episode really does make it clear time is passing. This isn't like they've just left and they've never come back. It's hard to say how much time has passed, but it certainly seems like at least a few days, at least maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. Well, Graham's retired, and Ryan's kind of left in a job where it feels like he could go back to it any time or find something equivalent, and may not even want to stay in that job. Yaz has a job where you can't just disappear for months on end and not expect there to be consequences. She's supposed to be a police officer, and yet continuously in episode after episode her behavior rarely really reflects that. And maybe that's my own prejudice towards what I think a police officer should behave, but it's just a young woman who's struggling in the first episode is struggling to establish herself as a cop, to be taken serious, somebody who doesn't just want to be a meter maid, somebody who wants to get the real stuff. Well, is she giving up on that as she decided to put it all in with the Doctor? It's maybe, but the show hasn't done a good enough job making that clear. And like I said, if you give me the Doctor, you give me Dr. Graham or Ryan, I can give you a pretty good idea how they'll react in most scenarios. I don't really know how Yaz is yet. Now, that's not to say Demons of Punjab isn't a good episode for her, because it is. It's a terrific episode for her. And I want to make it clear, I don't think at all this complaint is anything super serious that's ruining the show. I mean, we've seen bad companions, both in Old Who and in New Who. I mean, she is definitely above something like Martha or the first half season. Clara in particular, at the first, wasn't a character. She was a plot device. She was just all over the place. And Yaz isn't that bad. She, in part because her family has more reality and more nuance and more texture to them, even in their relatively brief screen time, than example, certainly Clara's family ever had. And even someone like Martha Jones, who's another character who I feel a lot of comparisons to. Her family definitely got screen time, but they rarely ever rose above very sitcom, very surface level, in a way that when they had to take a bigger role at the end of the season, kind of hurt that, in my opinion. They didn't really come off as characters up until that point. Already, I think Yaz's family, between what we got in Iraq, it's in the UK, and what we get here, feels like a real family. Like, we get an idea, in Arachnids, we got an idea of Yaz's mother. We got an idea of her strength. We got an idea of her personality. And this episode, as we get to explore her mother's past, Yaz's grandmother, we get to see there's a definite clear through line from Yaz's grandmother to Yaz's mother to Yaz. You could definitely see that this is 3 generations of women and where they're each drawing their strength from and how they're living their lives and what they're doing. There's a lot of texture there, and there's a lot of stuff that makes sense. And yes, his sister and father don't feel as necessarily fleshed in yet, but that's fine. They work well as background pieces of background characters for Yaz. So my problem isn't with Yaz in terms of her background. I think that a lot of that makes sense. My problem is with her characterization from moment to moment in the larger episodes. I still don't feel like they quite have a handle on why she's doing what she's doing and how she's behaving and what she wants. Like, a good TARDIS companion ultimately wants something. Maybe it's something as simple as just adventure and a break from their old life. That worked perfect for Rose. Maybe it's something like with Donna, where she's trying to look for a companion and find her place in the world. Maybe it's something like Rory and later, Amy and later Rory, who Amy was looking for the fairy tale to come to life, to try and reclaim the childhood that she lost. And then she and Rory come together over this. It just, you see what I'm saying. And Clara in later seasons definitely has good characterizations. In the first 12th Doctor season, she's trying to balance between her normal life and the life she has with this man who is her friend. But is he still her friend? And she's trying to balance all that, and then she experiences a great tragedy. And that informs the next season, where basically the show does a really good job of quietly making it clear that in a lot of ways, Clara's spinning out of control in that last season for her, and she pays the consequences for it. And with Yaz, like I said, I still feel like we're not there yet. But the good news is, I think we're going to get there. And I think if nothing else, we get a lot more development for her. Oh God, I've talked so long, and I haven't even barely mentioned the aliens in this episode. And I definitely do not want to let the episode go without discussing them. Because it's an episode that does so many things right. There's no question in my mind that one of the biggest successes is the Tajaran. I think I got that right. I just, everything about these aliens is wonderfully executed. No pun intended. I love the idea of this race of assassins who, after experiencing an incredible traumatic loss of their planet, their people, instead of lashing out and diving deeper into a violence that has largely defined them as a race, they look inwards and they come out the other end as realizing the pain that they have caused and the pain in general, and deciding that they're going to do whatever they can to make things better, even if all that is watching and making sure that those who die do not die so alone. And that those who die alone are remembered. And it's not enough. It's not enough. The episode makes it very clear. It's not enough. But it's something. And it's better than nothing. And it's such a powerful idea. Such a brilliant, beautiful idea. And the way it echoes the Doctor in a way. The way it echoes her own relationship with her people and her own behavior and her own loss and her own mistakes. Remember, this is a character, this is a person who went to war and did things in that war that they considered so terrible. They blotted that entire part of their existence out of their memory. They denied it ever happened. They did everything they could to not acknowledge that ever happened, to the point where they basically wiped an entire life out. For a long time, pretended it didn't exist. So the Doctor is definitely someone who knows what it is to do terrible things and to regret it and to feel remorse. And that image at the end of the episode of the face of the face joining the galaxy of faces, forming a galaxy, a star of lost faces, of the way Prim, it's difficult for me to put into words how moved I was by that sequence. And then there's Prim himself. Wow. And Bream and Nani and just Doctor Who is a show that always has to have very, economy of storytelling, because as I mentioned back in the in both last week's episode and Arachnids UK, they don't have a lot of time to establish characters. I mean, we have our main cast, but almost every episode we have to establish a new place, a new time. We have to establish new characters, and we have to try and give them. They have to try and give them full lives within a relatively scant amount of screen time, while also balancing that out against our own main characters who still need their time. And really, Demons of the Punjab is a masterclass in how you do that. The characters we meet in this are quickly fleshed out, and none of our main reoccurring characters, even our supposed villain, Manish, even he doesn't come off as one dimensional. He's doing terrible things and he's made terrible choices. But it's portrayed in a way, it's framed in a way that makes that a tragic thing. He's not a villain to sneer at. He's a villain to pity. And to hate the things he does, but to mourn the reasons that he's doing it, and the forces that pushed him into it, and the things that led him to make those choices. And he's responsible for his own choices, but at the same time, he's caught up in larger events, and it's just the whole thing is incredibly tragic. And especially, I mean, the beauty of that wedding and the night before and the bonding that's going on, and then the actual wedding itself, which is so wonderfully done, and all the little touches, the blending of the culture, and the tragedy of that we know, and our leads know what's coming. That this is going to be such a brief moment of beauty and happiness in what's going to be a massive amount of ugliness, especially for those who survive, and all of it that doesn't still take away from that beauty. It is a brief love, a brief marriage, but it is no less real. It defines Yaz's grandmother for the rest of her life. Umbreen is affected by this, and she keeps that watch, and that's what it means. Is that, yes, they weren't together long as husband and wife, but it was no less meaningful for that. And yes, she moved on eventually, and yes, she built a life for her, and yes, she's happy with the life she built, but that doesn't mean she's forgotten, and that doesn't mean she doesn't still mourn, and that doesn't mean the tragedy that led to that life is any less tragic. And Prim's death is it's so sad, and it's so beautifully done. The way he sends the others off, and the way he knows he's walking to his death, and at the same time he can't hate Manish, who's still his brother. He knows that Manish has become something toxic and dangerous, and he's got to cut Manish out of his life, as it were, or at least out of the life of the rest of the people he loves. And he doesn't really go into it with any hope, clearly, of thinking he can save Manish, but he still has to try because he's his brother and he loves him. And there's been a lot of talk the last couple of years about having to cut toxic aspects of your life, toxic aspects of your family out of your life if necessary. And I agree with that concept. And I do think sometimes you have to do it, but I don't think it should ever be meant that that's easy. It's not like love is just this switch you can flip. You can love people in your life who are terrible, and you can acknowledge that they are terrible, and you can acknowledge that it's complicated because it is. You can love and hate someone at the same time. And the way we build up to Prim's death, the way it's shot, the way it's framed, the music, my God, the music. And the way we build to it, and then right as it's about to happen, we have the entrance of our aliens who say, this is now our time, we will take over from here, and just, that is one of the best sequences in the entire history of this series, going all the way back to the very first episode over 50 years ago. It is a remarkable sequence in a remarkable episode in what is shaping up to be a remarkable season. If every remaining episode, we have 4 episodes, 5 if you count the special, left in the season. And if every single one of those episodes was utter garbage, if every single remaining episode of Doctor Who this year is garbage, some of the worst Doctor Who ever made, this will still have been a good, maybe even great season of Doctor Who. And you know what? I sooner expect to see the TARDIS appear outside my door and the Doctor open up and actually invite me on for real adventures across time and space than I expect the rest of the episodes of this season to be garbage. Because yeah, the worst episode we've gotten this season was just okay. It wasn't even bad, and we've gotten 2 episodes of such remarkable strength and beauty, and I'm repeating myself at this point, but I guess I'm just kind of running out of... I really, really, really loved Demons of Punjab. It broke me in a way, but it broke me in a good way. And I think I'm so glad the show is now willing, that this is a series that is now both willing and able, when it goes back in time and when it gives us historical settings, to embrace the honesty of it, the tragedy of it, the terribleness of it, along with the beauty, along with the wonder, along with the this is a beautiful episode for all the sadness, and as much despite the sadness as because it, this was just a great episode. It was a great episode of Doctor Who, and again, I can't strongly recommend it enough. If you're still on the fence, please. If you're still on the fence and you've gotten this far in this review, well, thanks. You must be a really loyal fan of the show. But if you are a loyal fan of this show, please listen to me and go watch this series if you're not. Even if you're not normally a Doctor Who fan. Demons of the Punjab, this was a terrific... This was something special. This was something special, and I definitely hope we get more Doctor Who from Vinay Patel, because he's got a handle on these characters, on this world. He's got it. He gets it. And whatever he does next, I'm excited for, because this is somebody with real talent. I'll tell you that much. And that's going to do it for this episode of Unrepentant Geeking. See you back here next week for the next review of the next episode of Doctor Who, and whatever other sort of things I may be able to work up the energy for. I do have other stuff I want to review. I'm definitely going to be reviewing the first season of the new She-Ra reboot. You damn well better believe there's a review of that coming. I don't care if I have to do voice to, typing to voice software and, sound like a computer or whatever. There's a review of that coming. There's a review of that coming, but may have to wait a couple weeks. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, that's going to do it for now. I'll see you all next time. Until next time, for Unrepentant Geeking, this is Shaun wishing you all long days and pleasant nights.